Isha Khan, CEO of the Canadian Museum for Human Rights. Welcome to the BeCause and Effect podcast. It's great to see you.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
So we met a couple weeks ago now, but you've been in this role for not even 2 months, I think. So before we get into human rights and before we get into all the things that you are an expert on, I just want you to let us know sort of what these last couple months have been like with you coming into this new role. And I'm assuming it's just a whirlwind of meetings and figuring out what's going on behind the scenes and trying to kind of find your bearings and figure out how this new role is going to work for you.
Absolutely. It's meetings and more meetings. But what that means is a lot of conversations. My whole approach to coming into this position at the time that I did was that I just wanted to be open and talk to people. So those introductory meetings have actually been extremely nourishing in terms of just telling me what people want to see of me, of our museum. It's been really good. But hectic, no doubt.
For sure, no kidding. I mean, I was kind of researching you, and I don't want to insult any of our previous guests from the last few episodes, but you seem to be the most educated and like well-rounded, impressive sort of, resume that I've ever seen. Human rights lawyer for years. You are the founder of the Canadian Council of Muslim Women's Winnipeg chapter. You were senior counsel for the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, and now the CEO of the CMHR. So in all these different roles, how has it set you up for this new role of CEO of the CMHR?
I mean, all those things have set me up for this work, I think. And to be honest, I've had parts in all of those things. I would never claim to say that I founded the Winnipeg chapter. I did it with people in the community, friends and family, actually. I worked at the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, but with a huge team. So yeah, I all of that work has contributed. It actually has enforced that you can't do this kind of work alone. You have to do it with a team of people who have a common vision. That's why I like going to work, because you meet with people who have the same worldview as you and want to get the same things done. So yeah, certainly those things have prepared me. They've given me a lot of insight into the work that I'm going to do now, and just expanded my view. Got to meet a lot of people from many places that I may not have been or been able to meet with before.
Very cool. Now, I know you were on the outside looking in, as we all were, when the allegations against the Human Rights Museum were made and all that kind of stuff bubbled up. It's been reported ad nauseum, so people can Google it if they want to sort of read about what happened. But before we sort of get into the human rights aspect of your expertise, I think this is probably kind of like, if someone has a cast on, they're like, oh, what happened? I'm sure you've been asked thousands of times, but what do you say when people ask you about the allegations and everything that went down before you stepped into this new role?
Well, I say that I was watching too, that I probably felt many of the same emotions that others have felt about, disappointment or anger or just questioning, being surprised. But really a lot of what I talk about is the things that I wanted to do and see of this museum were things that they haven't changed since I heard about the allegations, since the review came out. I wanted to come in here and do this kind of work. I think every new leader should look around and say, do we have a diverse workplace? How do we treat our staff? How do we interact with our community? Who do we need to have on board with us to be successful? So I talk a lot about that. In terms of the review, it's good. It's thorough. It gives us a framework to do the kind of work that I kind of knew we needed to do, that we all should be doing.
Right. So watching your speech from the other night, when you were sort of, speaking to a lot of donors and a lot of different people that represented the foundation and supported the CMHR, you talked a lot about the mission and the mission for the next, year or 2 years or 6 months even, or 1 month, I guess. And it was pretty inspiring. So I want you to kind of just touch a little bit on your mission, your personal mission, your professional mission, and what are you hoping to accomplish in the, let's say, first 6 months, and then year, and then even 5 years? Like, what's your plan? What's your mission for the next, amount of time that you'll be there?
So I go back to what's the mandate of this museum, and it has a unique mandate because unlike, I shouldn't say unlike other national museums, but it's new on the block in terms of the other national cultural institutions and museums. And so when it was formed, the idea was that it would be a place to reflect. To look at our collective history, but to reflect and to dialogue and have conversations that would inspire people to take action. So that's a big dream. And when people talk about what's my mission, well, that's it. It's charted for me. My approach to getting there is to work with the community around us. When I think about what do I do immediately? Well, I've come in and I want our staff to be rallied around that vision. And so that's the work that I'm doing now. So when I talk about meetings and, it's hectic, but really it's getting to know the people I work with, understanding their areas of expertise and how they work, trying to pull that all together so that we move forward together. That's my immediate goal. Not to say that I haven't spent time talking to the communities around us, because some of it's reestablishing relationships, some of it's building new relationships. I've had difficult conversations with people who felt that they haven't been part of our work or our common vision, but yet they're passionate about it. So that's maybe medium term, right? A little bit when I feel like we feel stable and we feel strong, then I know that the community around us will be able to work in a more meaningful way with us. So I've been doing that. And then long term, we want to be bold. We want to push. We want to expand our reach. We want to touch as many people as we can, really, whether that's bringing them into our physical space or virtually. Because I think now more than ever, people need to think about human rights. They need to think about how we treat each other, think about where we're going as a society, and think about why we have the inequities we do. So
Yeah, for sure.
that's not a lot or anything.
No, yeah, it's not a tall order. You'll be fine. Why did you get into you could study any area of law and make that your focus, right? Why human rights? Like, it's such a big concept, right? And it's such a interesting and deep and never-ending fight, essentially, because there's always going to be people that are either suppressing or holding back or taking away rights. But where did this come from? Have you always been sort of a human rights champion, or did this grow over time, or how did this develop?
Well, I mean, I think I've always been interested in human rights and issues of discrimination and racism and other forms of oppression. I can think back when I was young. I was, a member of Amnesty International, and I was writing letters at my dining room table and giving them to my mom to put a stamp on and send off. So I do remember that for when I think about being young. But I studied law because I wanted to be an advocate. I wanted to do something to bring about change, and I didn't immediately go into human rights law. It's kind of a niche area. And so I was really privileged to do that work with the Manitoba Human Rights Commission. But I think I moved there because I dealt with people with workplace issues, with things that I cared about, and I could feel. I always said I needed to work in an area of law where I could feel that I was making a difference. And so for me, that was dealing with labor and employment issues, and where I kind of had my first taste of some human rights cases. So it's a bit of an evolution. It wasn't like I set out to say, I'm going to be a human rights lawyer. I actually didn't even think I'd be a lawyer. And then I didn't think I'd do human rights law. And, so.
It's weird, the paths that we take and the doors that open for us. Like, what do you remember what you wanted to be? That classic question, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Yeah. I think when I was really young, I wanted to open a daycare center.
Aw.
And then I wanted to be a teacher. And then I thought, oh, I want to be a broadcaster.
Hmm.
Um, uh, and then it moved into law. I didn't know as a young child, this is who I'm going to be. I think it's just sort of charted my course as I've moved for the next step.
Yeah. You
I
talked
think I
about.
always thought about social justice, though, I'll have to say that. I moved into the nonprofit world. I left law for a while and said, I'm going to work in the nonprofit world, and this is how I'm going to do it. And then I went back to sort of public advocacy. So there's a theme for sure, but I took a meandering route.
There is a thread, and it seems like this is one of those situations where everything you've done leading up to this point has prepared you for this role now. Is that fair to say?
It feels like it.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like it. Unplanned, but it's all sort of falling into place. I feel like I can do this job. Um, Not alone, but I feel like I have enough that I can at least have some idea about how to move forward, and I feel confident in that, which helps.
Has there anything has or I'm sure there's lots of things, but what's some of the biggest surprises in the first couple months that since you stepped into the CEO role?
Um, I don't know if there's surprises, but I've said a number of times to others, I've been really overwhelmed by the support.
Mm.
I've learned, of course, the reach that the CMHR has in our local community, but also nationally and internationally, things that I wasn't aware of. So that's been really heartening. But probably most it's not really surprising, but kind of, is that when I've had some really difficult conversations with community organizations or individuals who felt that they haven't been part of, haven't had a strong relationship or had their voices heard, and they've been difficult conversations, they almost always have ended with something positive. But we want to work with you. But we do want to do this together. Certainly from the perspective of we'll hold you accountable and we're going to expect some things of you, but I really, take that seriously. I want to be held accountable because I want to move in the direction that people want us to.
Yeah.
So that's been quite overwhelming in a very positive and enlightening way, I'd say.
So much time building bridges, mending bridges, and connecting people. Because the CMHR is a institution, and it is sort of a place that people are going to look to for leadership and for connection and for storytelling and all these things that kind of represent all these big ideas. And you're kind of you've been thrown in as the face of that. Like, you said you wanted to be a broadcaster, but how comfortable are you in front of the camera and sort of answering questions and doing all these interviews where people are sort of expecting you to be the face of all these concepts that are sort of these ethereal, not necessarily, do you know what I'm kind of saying? Is you have to speak for human rights almost. And how is that, has that weighed on your shoulders at all, or are you comfortable kind of speaking in that context?
Well, I try not to overthink it, and I figure that I'll be sincere, I'll be authentic, I'll share what I can, what my perspective is, um, and I'll often just share my approach, right,
Mm.
or my vision, as opposed to, um, this is my expertise in this area. But certainly, I've learned things from working with people. So when I think about being the face, um, I think there's so much more than just me and being a leader. I have a huge team of people uh, who I represent. I'm happy and proud to do that. Um, so yeah, I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. It does. And the best leaders, I think, that I've followed or that I've seen, there's a balance of confidence and humility, right? And it can't be, you can't be just blindly going your own direction and not listening to anyone else, but you also can't be too meek and shy, and you have to be willing to bring forth your ideas and stuff. And you seem to have found that balance quite well.
Let's see. Thank you.
So let's talk about human rights. Right now is a crazy time. In the last as many years as I can think back on, there's been either through the media or through the news or through local things that we hear all these human rights abuses, and you can probably speak to dozens, if not more. But the thing that I'm personally struggling with, and I think a lot of my peers are struggling with, is how do you, I don't even know how to phrase this, how do you stay calm and argue in favor of human rights when you're arguing against people who want to take them away? Do you know what I mean? Like, how do you not get frustrated? How do you come to the table when one side of the table is arguing, I think everyone should have equality, equity, and human rights for all, and the other side of the table is saying no to that? Like, it just seems to me you can't even have a real discussion when people aren't even willing to acknowledge the humanity in the other side. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because it's difficult for me to watch what's happening in the world and come to the conclusion that we could ever come to the same page, like be on the same page with the people on the other side of the argument. Can you help me understand that?
Well, the way that I look at it, and this is how I look at it on my best day, right? It's that juxtaposition or contradiction between those who want these laudable aspirational goals of equity and equality and justice, and those that perhaps don't want it. And I don't know if those people ever really articulate that they don't want it, but we feel that there is a contradiction or that there is tension. Bringing those people together, to me, that is where we actually do our best work. Actually, even as you've posed it, thinking about, how does that make you feel when you see these two points of view? That is where we actually open our minds up and say, okay, we figure out how to communicate with each other. And, if you move the needle even this much, in terms of someone opening their mind up to think about something differently, or to have heard someone else's opinion, I think we're doing what we're supposed to do. Like, that's where all the magic happens, in those difficult conversations. And I think about the museum, and part of what attracted me here is, again, going back to the vision for this space. That's exactly what it's about. It's about dialogue. So I'm attracted to those uncomfortable conversations. On my best day, it is frustrating, of course. It's human to feel defeated or exhausted sometimes by that work, but it's also the best work. And so for the most part, I feel really optimistic that we can move things if we actually bring those people together and those perspectives together.
That's the key point, because I've noticed a lot when we have events at the Winnipeg Foundation. Say we have an event on climate change. 150 people show up, but everyone in the room is already convinced. Everyone that shows up to the events are already kind of on the right side of history, if you want to call it that. So how do you get people to come to the table that need to be enlightened or educated or just sort of shown different perspectives when they might be unwilling to entertain new ideas?
I think you have to be open enough to entertain their ideas. You have to give them a space to share their ideas. What I've noticed in some of those difficult conversations is you have to sometimes sit back and let them share their view, even though you may find it to be outdated or ignorant or whatever it may be. You have to, and not everyone at every moment is prepared to do that. I mean, there are certain lines that we don't cross. So don't misunderstand me that we should put up with hate or in any form. But when it's sharing of perspectives, there is this place that if you're prepared for it and you can you can actually invigorate that kind of discussion, I think we do some really good work at changing minds, opening up ideas.
That's, I think, a very important point is right now a lot of the rhetoric and a lot of the conversations that happen, um, neither side gives the other side the benefit of the doubt, and everyone's kind of assuming the worst out of everyone. And I like to think I don't know if I'm an optimist or a realist or what I am, but I like to think everyone's coming from the same place, that they want happiness, safety, you know, food for their kids, and everyone wants pretty much the same thing. People just argue about how to get there, and if people are unwilling to give up what they're comfortable with, how do you try to change the world when the systems that have been in place have made certain groups quite comfortable and they're scared of giving up those comforts? Do you know what I mean? Like how can you gently explain to people that the way that things have been set up, you have benefited from these systems, but look at this group that hasn't benefited, and we need to kind of bring everyone up to that level, as opposed to keeping two tiers or three tiers of our society.
I think that you have to approach it helps to approach conversations around human rights from the to go back to the foundations of what they are. So we all have rights, right? We are all, the fundamental principle, we're all born free and equal in dignity and in rights. And when we have those difficult conversations, people tend to talk about, oh, they're their rights or those people, and this
Mm.
is what they want. And it's to remind them that we all have these rights and that they're for everyone. So sometimes that's creating a relatable example. As you say, people care about their families or their children, or putting money on the table. It's to make someone else's story relatable. Um, People then feel it in a different way, or it might open their minds up. Um, that's the kind of dialogue that I think is really inspiring. That's a lot of what we do here at the museum is trying to bring in those perspectives, um, which is why I like this work and I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. When it comes to Winnipeg specifically, you were born here, is that true?
Yeah.
So how what specific issues that Winnipeg is going through do you hope to acknowledge and tackle through the CMHR when it comes to Winnipeg's human rights conversation?
Well, I mean, I think I always say, I've always said, and I've lived elsewhere, but I'm from Winnipeg and I'm back in Winnipeg and have been for a long time. Um, we're a very special place. And then I come here to the museum and I say to our staff every time I have a chance to do, a bigger staff meeting or whatnot, look where we are. We're on Treaty One territory. We're at the meeting of the two rivers. We're in the Red River Valley where the Métis uh, nation was formed. This is a pretty special place in terms of gathering. When I think about the issues that we have here, inequity amongst many communities, but remarkably our Indigenous uh, population and people, um, issues of poverty and social disadvantage, um, issues of racism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, all of those things, I mean, they exist all across Canada. I do think, though, that Winnipeg has a strong social justice lens and always has.
Mm.
There's wonderful work that happens here in the community and has for years and years. Um, so when I think about us being here, I mean, we're a national museum, so we really do take a broad reach. But I know that we have so much here in our community around us, and I feel lucky that I'm aware, I know, or I've been here, and I'm a Winnipegger, and Winnipeg is pretty small at the end of the day. Um, and we have very personal connections. So that helps me. Doing the work here will help me broaden the reach of the work we do.
Yeah, it's a big little town, and having to have that context of like everybody knows everybody, so you better make sure you're cool with everybody almost, right? Like, yeah, it's an important aspect of things. I want to talk a little bit about your work reviewing federal penitentiaries, and because that's a crazy concept these days. You know, we hear a lot about for-profit prisons in the States and here, and just the quality of life that some prisoners are dealing with. So can you just maybe give me a brief overview of what you exactly did when it came to reviewing these penitentiaries, and what were some of your main takeaways when it came to, you know, what you sort of gained from those experiences?
So I left my work at the Manitoba Human Rights Commission to do this work as an external reviewer of cases in which individuals in our federal penitentiaries have been segregated from the general prison population. So solitary confinement, right? But the system had changed, and there was already systems put in place so that it would be different than what was, and that's fairly recent. My job was to look at individual cases, an individual who's been segregated from the, you know, what they call the general or mainstream population, and figure out, should they be there? While they're there, what are their conditions? Are they getting access to mental health assessment or treatment? Are they getting their medicines? Are they getting time out to exercise? You know, to talk to them, and to talk to the staff at the institution as well. And it was hard actually to leave that work, because it's very meaningful work. And I guess, I don't know if it was fortuitous, but with the pandemic and working from home, it meant that I spent a lot of time on video conferences with men in institutions, talking to them. So how's it going? How is your day today? So things going okay? Tell me about it. Is there, you know, and having those conversations. And I learned a lot. I learned that people need a chance. I shouldn't say I learned, but it definitely confirmed for me that people need a chance to be heard, that they often just want to tell their story, and that they have complicated stories. So if we think about systemic factors, how you grew up, what you had in front of you, did you have food on the table, all of those issues, they're right in your face. And you've got someone who's telling you, this is what I know. This is why I behaved in the way that I did. It was humbling, really, especially having worked in the area of human rights. It was humbling to hear directly from people about their stories, and then to think, okay, so what do we do with that, and why haven't we done enough?
So what do we do with that? Like, I think the average person, because it's so far removed from our everyday lives, like, we don't really think about the people who were taken out of society, and we don't really think about the quality of life of people who were taken out of society, because I think for a long time people have thought, oh, well, they lost their rights. They lost their right to mental health support, you know, all these things. But how we treat the offenders among us speaks a lot about what our society is like, right? So what did you take away from that? How as a society did we treat these men and women, and what needs to change?
I learned that everyone has a story, and that we should take time to hear their story, which means that whatever barriers to hearing their story, our own prejudice or bias or time or inefficiency in a system, we need to identify those and find ways of reducing or removing those barriers. So certainly that was probably my biggest takeaway. But, you know, to be hopeful, there is good work being done. I mean, the justice system is looking at sentencing and looking at what principles inform our whole criminal justice system and sentencing. There's advocates who are working tirelessly to bring these issues out in the media. Before I came here at the museum, there was work to convene that discussion about um, uh, wrongful convictions and about the stories of people who've been through a system that um, hasn't treated them as it ought to. So there's good work. There's lots of work to do there.
Yeah, for sure. And it's about reform. It's not about punishment. Well, I mean, that's I think maybe the crux of the argument is some people think that the criminal justice system is there to punish, and some hope that it would be there to fix and to improve and to help and to guide and to educate. But how do you have that conversation with someone who's been wronged by theft or murder or whatever you want to say? Like how do you convince people that everyone deserves the chance to make it right and to improve themselves and improve their communities?
I think you do that, honestly, by building an understanding that we all have certain rights, that we're born with those rights, and we have to respect those rights.
Mm-hmm.
So it just goes back to that fundamental principle. We're all human beings. We're born with this inherent dignity, and we need to respect that. And our institutions and these institutions that we create need to respect that, whether it's a workplace, a business, or whether it's a correctional system. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the understanding we need to build.
Yeah, and no one loses their rights just because they make a bad decision. I think that's the big part of it is people think just because you do one, like, no one should be judged by the worst moment of their life, and that's a pretty common theme, I think, with the criminal justice system, is like you make this one decision or you go down this one path, and then all of a sudden that's what your life is defined by for the rest of your existence. And I think if people had more empathy for those moments and say, like, okay, well, yes, that was terrible, but how can we reintroduce you into society in a healthy and stable and supportive way? But I mean, you're a human rights lawyer, not a psychiatrist, not a psychologist, like all these things. How did you deal with having these one-on-one intimate conversations with people who probably haven't had a lot of empathy in their experiences? So, like, was there a lot of emotional outbursts, or, like, moments where people kind of, I finally get to tell my story, someone's actually listening to me, or had they had those experiences up to that point?
I think it varied.
Mm.
I might have talked to someone who'd been um, in an institution for 18 months, or someone who'd been there for 14 years. And it depends. I think I really think that people just want to tell their story, and emotional outbursts. I mean, sometimes, but sometimes not. And I think that's the whole concept of meeting people where they're at. Asking a question and someone to give their story with great insight and reflection. Some just want to say this is how their day was and they had a
Mm.
sandwich for lunch. Um, but I do think when people ask me about the criminal justice system and these issues. I mean, we have a system, and it's not perfect, but we have a system of we have a justice system, and it results in many cases people being put in an institution, in a correctional institution, in a penitentiary. The idea is that when they're there, they're still human beings, and there is lots of good things that happen, and so I came into it wanting to learn, and I met many people on both sides who would say, yeah, this is great, you know, um, relatively, of course, but this has been a good experience for me. I've been meeting
Mm.
with an elder.
Mm.
Um, I've been working with a psychologist. I get my medicines every day. I'm working on my addictions. I have friends. So it's the idea, I guess, that it's hard for us to say this is how it's got to be for everyone. But when you go to the core principles, I think that's when we can say, yeah, this is how it should be for everyone.
Yeah. Every situation is different, right? Like every single person has had a different path leading up to that point. So every single person needs different treatment and different, help when it comes to battling their demons and working through a lot of those issues. I want one more question on this topic, then we'll move on. Help me sort of settle a debate, because my old roommate and I used to talk a lot about recidivism and about sort of if people can be rehabilitated, and he often took the position that some people are just broken and that's why we need prisons. And I had a difficult time with that, because I thought everyone has a chance to be, I don't want to say fixed, because I don't want to say that they're broken, but everyone has a chance to be rehabilitated, and there is a way for every single person. You just have to either have more patience, take more time. So what are your thoughts on, can everyone, no matter what upbringing they've had, be reintroduced and become a quote unquote productive member of society? Or are there some cases where, okay, this needs to be removed from the general populace, and that's just the way it is because there's no other option?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I don't want to give an opinion that's not informed. I do know that everyone I met was generally quite polite and was thankful of the chance to talk and to meet and shared their information. And I had very few interactions where I thought, this person wasn't deserving of my time. In fact, I never had that feeling, to be honest. And then sometimes I'd go and I'd read all these things about what they were doing there. No, that didn't come across in our meeting, because at the end of the day, we were just two human beings saying, how was your week going?
Right.
And how are things for you? So it's very meaningful work that needs attention, that people are doing, but we all need to think a little bit about it, I think.
Yeah, just empathy. At the end of the day, if you have empathy for your fellow human beings, you think, okay, we're all in this together. We're all just babies growing up trying to figure out how to survive and how to put food on the table, like you said before. But yeah, thanks for sort of entertaining this conversation. I know it's sort of a weird, bizarre thing to talk about, but I think it's an important conversation to have, for sure.
I think your roommate and you are still going to be battling that one out.
It's a never-ending debate for sure, but that's why I like having them, because there is no right answer, and nobody really knows for sure, because every situation is different. But it's just a cool philosophical kind of concept to talk about. At the end of our time together, I know you're busy, you probably got a full schedule for today, but we do a segment called Just Because, where it's the same 7 questions to all of our guests, talking about the causes that you care about and the effect that it's had on your lives. Are you okay to do that?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Question 1, what's the very first cause you actually even remember caring about?
So I think it probably was those letter writing campaigns for amnesty. I can't, maybe there were others when I was younger, but I can't actually remember.
Did your parents encourage this? Like, were they kind of like, hey, get down and write some letters, or did this come from your own desires?
They certainly encouraged it. They gave me stamps, they gave me envelopes, they mailed my letters. They engaged in conversations with me. So yeah, they supported that for sure.
Very good. Question 2, if money and politics and logistics were no issue at all for you, what's the first thing if you could just snap your fingers and something would happen, what's the first thing you would do in support of your current cause?
Really bring people together, foster some empathy, some understanding, get people to talk to each other, to have uncomfortable conversations and share their thoughts.
Is that what the museum is doing now? Like, what are you guys doing in the sort of post-COVID world to try to connect people when it's so difficult to leave your house these days?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's work that even pre-COVID, this museum was about bringing people together to dialogue so that it could inspire some positive action. And so Yeah, so that's happening. The people who come here physically to the building and go through the exhibits, but there's virtual tours. There's people who engage with digital stories on our digital platforms, and they comment on them. And so, yeah, that's absolutely what we're doing.
I
That's
think
that's the exciting stuff.
that's one of the coolest things about the organization is just the inclusivity of it. It's like everyone, come on in. Let's talk. Whatever your story is, come on in. We'll tell your story, and we'll tell you some stories about the history as well, which is really really cool. Question 3: what's the biggest misunderstanding or stigma about your cause?
I think people often don't understand what human rights are, or they've packaged it up as something they don't need to think about. And I fully appreciate not everyone wants to read about human rights law or the foundations of human rights principles, but they think it doesn't impact them. That's the biggest misunderstanding. And so that's where, we had talked about bringing people to say, these are rights, these are your rights too. This is why you get to apply for jobs and feed your children, have money to feed your children, walk freely, speak freely.
Yeah, I think that's the main point that people need to focus on is that if you take like people have been taking their rights for granted, and as soon as something gets infringed upon, then you're like, oh, maybe I should have been fighting for like down the line when they were talking about what's that old quote? It's like first they came for the I don't know if it's the Jews, but I was not a Jew, so I didn't speak anything, and then they came for me, right? And it's like, well, that's what happens. So you should be fighting for all human rights at all points, which is, I think, a hard lesson for people to learn, maybe.
And celebrating them, right? Like, and I don't mean celebrating with a party, but just understanding what they are, and recognizing what you have.
Yeah.
So that's the part about building understanding and where we need education.
Yeah. Well said. Question 4: what's a time in your life where you had to pivot because plan A wasn't working out, so you had to go to plan B?
I can't think of a specific instance where I've had to, I mean, surely I've had to pivot in terms of approach. I probably, if I think about it in my experience with doing human rights cases, sometimes you have to decide you're going to come on strong and you're going to educate, and this is how we're going to go. And other times you think this is not working. We're not relating in any way. And so, okay, let's pivot and let's step back a little, let this person have some space to share their side and look for where we can find some commonality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very important for sure. Question 5: what's the best piece of advice that you've ever been given?
I was so I recall when I was at the Manitoba Human Rights Commission, we had a wonderful strategy. We had a plan, we had timelines, we had deliverables, we had measurable goals, and we pulled together a council of elders and to talk to them about this was our plan. We wanted to go to northern communities, and this is how we were going to do it. And their advice to me, was slow down, slow down. Let people get to know you. Build a relationship with people, and then people will work with you. And I think about that a lot.
That's such good advice, because I think a lot of times in the work we do at the foundation too, it's kind of like, you think that you're the expert, and a lot of times as far as education is concerned, you might be, but when it comes to certain specific communities or certain individuals, you're not the expert on their life or their experience or their path up to that point, right? You're the expert in the general sense. So yeah, I love that advice, and a few people have said similar things in that. It's just like, slow down, take your time, and listen, as opposed to imposing and talking a lot. Just listen. And I love that. That's very, very important. What advice would you give your 10-year-old self if you could talk to her right now?
Be proud. Be proud of who you are. Don't worry so much that people won't like you or they'll think that you're different. Feel confident in who you are, and people will support you. They'll come with you.
Definitely. Very cool. Last question. Thank you, Aisha, for doing this. The last question's the biggest and sort of maybe hardest one, but question 7 is, what do you want to be remembered for?
Um, I want to be I want to be remembered for advocating for others, for a commitment to respect and equity and equality for other people. Um, I want to be remembered uh, for raising my 3 kids and being a good friend and family member, good kid, good
Beautiful.
colleague, all of those things. Probably what
Very.
you want to be remembered for.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm there with you. Thank you, Aisha. This was wonderful. I love hearing you speak, and I look forward to all the great work that I know that you're going to do, because it's important work, and it's exciting to see the direction that the CMHR is going in, and with you at the helm, I think they're in good hands.
Thanks, Nolan. It's
Thanks.
fun chatting with you.